On a summer night in Orlando, a rising star's life was cut tragically short. Christina Grimmie, beloved singer and YouTube sensation, faced an unimaginable horror during a meet and greet with fans. This is the shocking true story of talent, obsession, and the night that changed lives forever. Christina Grimmie's journey to stardom was one defined by talent, persistence, and the new age of digital influence. Born on March 12, 1994, in Marlton, New Jersey, Christina was drawn to music at a very young age. She spent her childhood immersed in melodies, mastering the piano and experimenting with her voice, showing an instinctive understanding of musicality far beyond her years. Supported by her family, who recognized her exceptional ability, Christina began posting videos of her singing on YouTube in 2009, a platform that would soon propel her into the global spotlight. These videos showcased not only her vocal prowess but also her charm, relatability, and the authenticity that would become her hallmark. She connected with viewers not just as a performer but as a young woman sharing her passions with the world, creating a bond that went beyond mere entertainment. As her online following grew, Christina's reputation for extraordinary vocal talent attracted attention from the music industry. Her YouTube channel amassed millions of views, with fans praising her range, emotional depth, and the sheer joy she brought to every performance. She covered songs from popular artists and infused them with her own style, often adding subtle nuances that reflected both maturity and vulnerability. This online success led to opportunities that bridged the virtual and physical worlds of music. She released original songs, performed at small venues, and engaged with her audience through social media platforms, building a community of loyal supporters. For Christina, her fans were more than numbers. They were people who had been part of her journey from the very beginning. In 2014, Christina's career took a pivotal turn when she auditioned for the 6th season of The Voice, one of the nation's most watched singing competitions. Her audition performance stunned both judges and viewers, earning her immediate praise and admiration. Christina chose Adam Levine as her coach, a decision that would shape her time on the show. Week after week, she delivered performances marked by technical precision, emotional authenticity, and a unique ability to connect with audiences. Her presence on national television introduced her to millions who had yet to discover her online work, further solidifying her position as an emerging star. Beyond her talent, Christina's personality, warm, humble, and approachable, made her a fan favorite. Viewers felt they were witnessing the rise of someone who remained genuine despite the pressures of sudden fame. Even as her professional profile grew, Christina remained deeply engaged with her fans through online interactions. She understood the power of social media, not only as a tool for promotion but as a means of cultivating personal connections. Her YouTube videos, live streams, and social media posts provided glimpses into her life, from studio sessions and behind-the-scenes moments to reflections on her personal growth and artistic journey. This accessibility created an intimacy that her audience cherished, but it also introduced a vulnerability that would have unforeseen consequences. The same platforms that allowed her to thrive as an artist also provided a means for those with unhealthy obsessions to follow her every move, blurring the lines between admiration and dangerous fixation. Christina's professional life involved extensive travel and performances, a rhythm that demanded both discipline and resilience. She transitioned from local venues to national tours, performing for audiences that spanned age groups and backgrounds. Each concert was a blend of artistry and connection, where Christina's ability to engage directly with fans created memorable experiences for attendees. Meet and greet events, in particular, were moments where she could interact personally, signing autographs, posing for photos, and sharing brief conversations. These encounters, though brief, were powerful for her supporters, offering them a sense of closeness to someone they admired deeply. For Christina, these interactions were meaningful but carried the invisible risk of attracting attention from individuals whose admiration could turn into dangerous obsession. Behind the scenes, her family played a crucial role in managing both her career and safety. Christina's parents and 2 older brothers provided guidance, support, and protection as she navigated a world that demanded both artistic excellence and personal vigilance. Their presence was a stabilizing force in her life, ensuring that she remained grounded even as her career accelerated. Yet, despite precautions and awareness, The structures in place were limited by the unpredictable nature of public fame and the intensity of the fan culture that had grown around her. Christina's kindness, accessibility, and openness were traits that endeared her to millions, but simultaneously made her susceptible to individuals who misinterpreted admiration for entitlement. As the summer of 2016 approached, Christina was at a peak in her career. Her music continued to receive acclaim, and her live performances drew enthusiastic crowds. She had a new single ready for release, plans for tours, and an expanding fan base eager to support her work. Yet, alongside this professional momentum, there were subtle indicators of risk inherent to her public visibility. The rise of social media-fueled obsession had created a climate in which performers like Christina, who maintained personal interactions with fans, were uniquely exposed. It was a reality often discussed in security briefings and among management teams, but the combination of openness and trust that Christina maintained with her audience made it difficult to anticipate when admiration could cross the line into danger. By the evening of June 10, 2016, Christina had performed at the Plaza Live in Orlando, Florida. For a mid-sized audience that included both longtime followers and newer fans introduced through her television appearances. The energy of the crowd, the cheers, and the engagement reflected the culmination of years of hard work, dedication, and the bond she had built with her supporters. She was scheduled to participate in a meet and greet immediately following her concert, an event designed to foster personal interaction and celebrate the connection between artist and audience. It was an environment she cherished, where her ability to inspire and uplift was at its most tangible. Little did anyone know that the very qualities that made Christina a beloved figure, her accessibility, warmth, and genuine care for her fans, would intersect with the darkest aspects of obsession, setting the stage for a tragedy that would shock the world. The evening of June 10, 2016, began like many of Christina Grimmie's performances, with anticipation and excitement electrifying the air at the Plaza Live in Orlando, Florida. The venue, modest yet intimate, allowed for a close connection between the artist and her audience. Fans of all ages gathered, some having traveled long distances, eager to witness the talent that had captured their hearts through YouTube and television. Christina's performance that night was imbued with the energy and warmth that had become her signature. Every note, every gesture, reflected the hours of preparation, the dedication to craft, and the desire to connect with those who had supported her journey from the earliest days online. After the concert concluded, Christina prepared for the meet and greet segment, a moment she approached with both excitement and care. These events were a chance for her to engage personally, to offer gratitude to her fans, and to make each individual feel seen and valued. Security personnel were stationed at the venue, tasked with maintaining order and ensuring the safety of both performer and audience. Yet, even with precautions in place, the unpredictable nature of human behavior left gaps that were difficult to anticipate. Christina, accompanied by her family, moved through the crowd, signing autographs, posing for photos, and exchanging brief conversations. The atmosphere was one of celebration and connection, a moment that exemplified the bond she had cultivated with her supporters. Amid the lively scene, Kevin James Loibl, a 27-year-old man from St. Petersburg, Florida, arrived at the venue with a single, chilling purpose. Loibl had reportedly developed an unhealthy obsession with Christina over time. He had followed her career online, interpreting her public persona and interactions as a form of personal intimacy. Armed with 2 semi-automatic handguns and a backpack containing additional ammunition, Loibl entered the building. Surveillance footage captured his calm yet deliberate movements, a stark contrast to the vibrant energy surrounding him. Witness accounts later described his demeanor as eerily composed, as if he were stepping into a scenario he had meticulously imagined, unaware or indifferent to the consequences of his actions. As Christina continued interacting with fans, Loibl bypassed security, exploiting the vulnerabilities inherent in a public space where openness was part of the experience. In a matter of moments, the joyous atmosphere transformed into chaos. Without warning, Loibl opened fire, targeting Christina at close range. The suddenness of the attack left little time for reaction. Security personnel, trained to respond to emergencies, immediately tackled Loibl, restraining him and preventing further harm. Amid the confusion, Christina's brother, who had accompanied her that evening, acted instinctively, attempting to shield her from the bullets. His courageous intervention slowed the shooter's progress, but it could not prevent the devastating injuries inflicted upon Christina. Emergency responders arrived swiftly, their presence a vital link between the scene of violence and the hope for survival. Christina was rushed to Orlando Health's trauma center, where medical teams worked tirelessly to stabilize her condition. The staff faced a scenario that was both urgent and harrowing, navigating the complexities of multiple gunshot wounds while striving to preserve life. Despite their best efforts, the injuries proved fatal. Christina Grimmie, a young woman whose life had been defined by music, creativity, and connection, was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. Her passing sent shockwaves through the local community, the music industry, and her global fan base, a tragedy amplified by the innocence and suddenness of its occurrence. Kevin Loibel's life ended at the scene, the result of a self-inflicted gunshot wound after being subdued by security personnel. Investigators later pieced together his actions and motivations, revealing a pattern of obsessive fixation. Loibel had no prior criminal record, a detail that underscored the unpredictable nature of his escalation from admiration to lethal violence. His preparation, traveling to Orlando, arming himself, and selecting the timing of his approach, demonstrated a calculated intent, a stark contrast to the spontaneous, celebratory environment Christina had cultivated around her performances. The juxtaposition of intent and innocence highlighted the perilous intersection between public visibility and private obsession. In the immediate aftermath, authorities secured the scene, gathering evidence and statements from witnesses who had witnessed the horrific events unfold. Security protocols, while effective in containing the shooter, were insufficient to prevent the tragedy entirely. Investigators faced the dual challenge of understanding both the logistical execution of the attack and the psychological factors that had driven Loibel to commit such a violent act. Through interviews, digital forensics, and analysis of Loibel's personal history, a picture emerged of an individual whose delusions and fixation had culminated in catastrophic consequences. The impact of the shooting extended far beyond the confines of the Plaza Live. News outlets quickly disseminated reports of the incident, capturing global attention. Fans and celebrities alike reacted with disbelief, mourning the loss of a vibrant and promising talent. Social media, which had been instrumental in Christina's rise to fame, became a conduit for collective grief and remembrance. Tributes poured in, ranging from heartfelt messages by peers in the entertainment industry to personal reflections from fans who had followed her journey since her early days on YouTube. The narrative of Christina's death was intertwined with her life, emphasizing both the tragedy of the act and the extraordinary life cut short by it. As the day unfolded, the broader conversation around the incident began to take shape. Questions emerged about concert security, the responsibilities of venues hosting public figures, and the broader societal issues related to gun violence. Christina's death underscored the vulnerabilities that performers face when engaging directly with fans in accessible settings. The incident became a stark illustration of the fine line between admiration and obsession, demonstrating how easily public attention can be exploited by individuals with dangerous intent. The collective response emphasized not only grief but also a desire to prevent similar tragedies in the future, prompting discussions on enhanced safety measures and awareness of psychological risks associated with public fame. In the hours and days following the shooting, memorials and vigils began to form spontaneously. Fans gathered to honor Christina's life, leaving flowers, notes, and tokens of remembrance at local sites and online forums. Her music played a central role in these commemorations, a reminder of the talent, passion, and joy she had shared with the world. Each tribute reflected the depth of her impact, a young artist whose reach had extended far beyond the confines of her immediate surroundings. While the events of that evening could not be undone, the response highlighted the resilience and solidarity of a community united in mourning and remembrance. In the days following Christina Grimmie's tragic death, the world struggled to reconcile the vibrancy of her life with the suddenness of her loss. The initial shock gave way to grief, reflection, and an urgent examination of how such a tragedy could occur in a setting meant to celebrate music, connection, and community. Authorities, family, and the broader public grappled with questions about security, safety, and the unsettling ease with which an obsessed individual had penetrated what should have been a protected environment. Law enforcement agencies launched a thorough investigation into Kevin James Loibel's actions, seeking to understand both his planning and his motivations. Interviews with acquaintances, online activity analysis, and surveillance footage painted a chilling portrait of a man whose obsession had escalated to fatal violence. Though Loibel had no prior criminal history, investigators identified patterns of delusional fixation in his digital behavior. Messages, social media interactions, and internet searches suggested that he had developed an intense, skewed perception of a personal connection with Christina. His preparation, carrying multiple firearms, traveling across the state, and identifying a moment when security might be circumvented, revealed a methodical, premeditated approach, underscoring the danger posed by obsession left unchecked. Authorities also reviewed the security protocols at the Plaza Live to determine how Loibel had gained access. The venue had standard measures in place, including trained personnel and controlled entry points. Yet the investigation revealed that the very design of meet-and-greet events, which prioritized closeness and fan interaction, created vulnerabilities that were difficult to eliminate entirely. The tragic result emphasized the tension between accessibility for fans and the protection of performers, highlighting a challenge faced by venues worldwide. Balancing hospitality and safety in high-profile events. Recommendations emerged from these reviews, calling for heightened vigilance, reinforced protocols, and better training for personnel to identify and mitigate threats in real time. While the investigation unfolded, Christina's family faced the overwhelming task of processing personal grief under the public eye. Her parents and brothers were thrust into a spotlight they had never sought, navigating both their private mourning and the collective outpouring of sympathy from around the globe. Friends, colleagues, and fans offered support, attending vigils, sending messages, and creating memorials online. For her family, these gestures were both comforting and painful reminders of the life that had been stolen. They also became advocates for awareness, emphasizing the need to protect young performers and address the mental health and obsession risks that can accompany fame in the digital era. The media coverage of Christina's death was extensive, highlighting not only the circumstances of her shooting but also her remarkable life. Documentaries, news reports, and tribute segments explored her early years, rise to fame, and the profound impact she had on her fans. Journalists examined the broader societal implications, discussing the intersection of gun violence, celebrity accessibility, and the influence of social media in shaping relationships between public figures and their audiences. Christina's story became emblematic of the modern vulnerability faced by performers, the blurred line between admiration and obsession, and the potential consequences when that line is crossed. Fans worldwide engaged in acts of remembrance, often using social media as both a memorial and a platform for advocacy. Hashtags, tribute videos, and collective postings allowed communities to express grief, celebrate her artistry, and raise awareness about the dangers of unchecked fixation. Charitable efforts and initiatives honoring Christina's legacy began to emerge, focusing on music education, online safety, and support for victims of violence. These efforts reflected a desire to transform tragedy into meaningful action, ensuring that her memory would inspire positive outcomes even in the wake of profound loss. Music, the medium through which Christina had touched so many lives, became central to her ongoing legacy. Her recordings, both original works and covers, continued to be shared, streamed, and celebrated. Fans found solace in her voice, revisiting performances that encapsulated her talent, personality, and emotional depth. Concerts, memorial events, and online tributes frequently featured her songs, allowing audiences to experience her artistry in ways that transcended the finality of her death. The enduring power of her music highlighted the duality of her legacy. While her life had been tragically cut short, the impact of her artistry remained vibrant and far-reaching. The incident also prompted discussions about preventative measures and mental health awareness. Psychologists, security experts, and advocates emphasized the importance of recognizing obsessive behavior and addressing it before it escalates into violence. Christina's story became a case study for performers, managers, and venue operators, demonstrating the critical need for comprehensive safety protocols and proactive risk assessment. These discussions underscored a sobering reality. The digital age, while providing unprecedented opportunities for connection, also facilitates forms of surveillance and obsession that can threaten the well-being of public figures. Legally, the case concluded with a focus on the perpetrator's actions and the systems that had failed to prevent the tragedy. While Loibel's death meant there would be no criminal prosecution, the investigation informed future security measures and public safety guidelines. Venues, artist management teams, and law enforcement agencies reevaluated approaches to public events, incorporating lessons learned from the circumstances surrounding Christina's death. These measures, while unable to reverse the loss, sought to prevent similar incidents, offering a small measure of progress from a profoundly devastating event. Christina Grimmie's passing left an indelible mark on both the music industry and the global community of fans who had followed her rise. Her story was remembered not merely for the circumstances of her death, but for the vibrancy, kindness, and artistry she embodied. She remained a symbol of talent, resilience, and connection, inspiring young musicians and fans alike to pursue their passions and cherish the bonds formed through shared appreciation of music. Memorials, scholarships, and ongoing tributes ensured that her influence would continue to resonate, transforming a narrative of tragedy into one of enduring inspiration. Ultimately, the tragedy of June 10, 2016, serves as a poignant reminder of the fragility of life, the responsibilities inherent in public visibility, and the unforeseen dangers that accompany fame in the modern era. Christina Grimmie's legacy endures not only through her music, but also through the conversations she sparked about safety, mental health, and the profound impact that a single life can have on countless others. Her voice, preserved in recordings and cherished memories, continues to resonate, offering a lasting testament to her talent, her spirit, and the enduring connection she forged with the world. A rising NFL superstar with fame, fortune, and a young family. Then a shocking murder, a life sentence, and a cryptic death inside a prison cell. Aaron Hernandez's story is a chilling descent from glory to tragedy, where hidden demons, legal twists, and haunting final messages blur the line between triumph and ruin. The story of Aaron Hernandez begins not inside a prison cell but on the shining fields of American football, where talent and promise once defined his name. Born in Bristol, Connecticut, in 1989, Aaron grew up in a family that valued toughness and loyalty. His father, Dennis Hernandez, was a respected figure in the community, a former athlete who coached young players with a mix of discipline and affection. Aaron idolized him, but their relationship was layered with complexity. Dennis's sudden death from complications after routine surgery when Aaron was just 16 became a turning point. The loss left a deep wound, stripping away the primary authority figure in his life and creating a vacuum of guidance at a critical age. Friends and relatives later described Aaron as a young man who seemed outwardly composed but carried an unspoken storm within. By the time he enrolled at the University of Florida, Aaron's natural athleticism had made him a standout. He possessed a rare combination of speed, size, and instinct that caught the attention of NFL scouts. As a tight end for the Florida Gators, he became a key weapon in their offensive arsenal, helping the team secure a national championship. Coaches marveled at his skill, yet some noticed a darker side, a quick temper, a restless energy that sometimes erupted into fights or late-night partying. The NFL, hungry for game-changing talent, largely overlooked these concerns when the New England Patriots drafted him in 2010. At just 20 years old, Aaron stepped into the professional spotlight, signing a lucrative contract and becoming one of the league's most promising young stars. His rise in the NFL was meteoric. Teaming up with fellow tight end Rob Gronkowski, he became part of an unstoppable offensive duo, celebrated by fans and sports analysts alike. On the field, he seemed untouchable, scoring touchdowns with ease, celebrated for his agility and precision. Off the field, however, shadows lengthened. Despite his wealth and fame, Aaron maintained connections to friends from his hometown, some of whom were involved in criminal activity. Nights of partying, run-ins with law enforcement, and whispers of violence began to follow him. These weren't just harmless distractions. They hinted at a double life that contrasted sharply with the polished image the Patriots promoted. In June 2013, the carefully balanced world Aaron had built collapsed. Odin Lloyd, a semi-professional football player and the boyfriend of Aaron's fiancée's sister, was found dead in an industrial park near Hernandez's home in North Attleboro, Massachusetts. The discovery sent shockwaves through the sports world. Surveillance footage, cell phone records, and ballistic evidence quickly pointed investigators toward Aaron. The narrative that unfolded was startling. A celebrated athlete accused of orchestrating a cold-blooded murder. The Patriots, faced with mounting evidence and relentless media scrutiny, released him from the team within hours of his arrest. The public watched in disbelief as the young star was led away in handcuffs, a stark contrast to the triumphant athlete who had once electrified stadiums. The trial that followed gripped the nation. Prosecutors argued that Hernandez killed Lloyd after a night out soured into confrontation, painting a portrait of jealousy and paranoia. The defense countered that the evidence was circumstantial and that no direct witness tied Aaron to the shooting. Throughout the proceedings, Aaron maintained an outward calm, often flashing a faint smile or sharing quiet moments with his fiancée, Shayana Jenkins. Yet the details presented in court, texts arranging late-night meetings, surveillance images of Hernandez holding what appeared to be a gun, and a trail of forensic evidence were damning. In April 2015, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For many, it marked the tragic downfall of an athlete who had once embodied limitless potential. Life behind bars at the Baranowski Correctional Center in Massachusetts was a stark contrast to the roaring stadiums of his past. Yet Hernandez adapted with surprising ease. Fellow inmates described him as charismatic and approachable, someone who maintained a sense of control despite the harsh realities of incarceration. He worked out regularly, played cards, and kept in touch with his family, particularly Shayana and their young daughter, Avielle. Beneath this routine, however, deeper struggles simmered. Reports surfaced of fights, disciplinary actions, and moments of sudden mood swings. Letters he wrote to friends and family revealed flashes of introspection, as though he were wrestling with demons that no amount of physical training could exorcise. Even as he served his life sentence, Aaron's legal battles were far from over. In 2017, he faced a second trial for a double homicide in Boston, accused of killing two men in a drive-by shooting outside a nightclub in 2012. The case threatened to cement his image as a violent criminal, but the outcome surprised many. After weeks of testimony and dramatic courtroom exchanges, Hernandez was acquitted on all major charges in April of that year. Supporters interpreted the verdict as a glimmer of redemption, proof that the system could still find reasonable doubt. In phone calls and visits, Aaron seemed optimistic, telling loved ones that he was focused on appealing his first conviction and holding on to hope for the future. Yet beneath the surface, the pressures of prison life, the weight of a tarnished legacy, and the toll of repeated head injuries may have been converging in dangerous ways. Neurologists would later reveal that Hernandez suffered from chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a brain disease linked to repeated blows to the head, common in football players. The symptoms, impulsivity, aggression, depression, aligned eerily with the violent outbursts and reckless decisions that had defined his final years of freedom. Though no one could fully grasp the extent of his internal turmoil, those closest to him sensed a man caught between fleeting optimism and a profound, private despair. As April 2017 unfolded, Aaron Hernandez appeared to be standing at a crossroads. To the outside world, he was a convicted murderer serving life, yet one who had just achieved a significant courtroom victory and maintained the support of his fiancée and daughter. To those inside the prison, he was an inmate who carried himself with unusual confidence, rarely showing signs of hopelessness. But behind the locked doors of his solitary cell, a far more intricate and tragic plan was already taking shape. A plan that would transform his story from one of athletic greatness and criminal downfall into a haunting mystery that still defies easy explanation. The night of April 18, 2017, inside the Baranowski Correctional Center unfolded like any other within the tightly controlled routines of a maximum security prison. Lights dimmed at the scheduled hour, doors clanged shut, and the echo of guards' footsteps faded into the stillness of solitary confinement. Aaron Hernandez, housed alone in cell 57 of the G2 unit, gave no outward sign that he was preparing for anything beyond another night in captivity. Fellow inmates later reported hearing nothing unusual. No cries, no sounds of struggle, only the quiet hum of the prison settling into darkness. Yet behind the thick steel door of his cell, Hernandez was carefully orchestrating the final act of a life that had veered between brilliance and chaos. Investigators would later piece together a timeline of those last hours. Sometime after the final head count, Aaron methodically arranged the sparse contents of his cell. Personal items were neatly stacked, clothes folded, and his bedding pulled taut as if he were preparing for inspection. A Bible lay open on the small desk. Turn to John 3 verse 16, a verse that speaks of eternal life and salvation through faith. In red ink, the same reference was scrawled on the wall and in smaller letters on the pages of the Bible itself. The choice of scripture suggested a deliberate message, though its meaning, whether spiritual, symbolic, or defiant, remained open to interpretation. There were other unsettling details. Hernandez used a red marker to draw a crude, unfinished circle on the cell wall, intersected by symbols that some observers likened to an ancient spiritual sign. Investigators also found the name of his young daughter written in faint lettering near the window, a silent nod to the child who had been both a source of joy and an emotional tether to the outside world. Tied to the window bars was a bedsheet twisted into a makeshift ligature. It was strong enough to bear his weight, carefully knotted to ensure there would be no chance of survival once he stepped off the sink and let gravity take hold. At approximately 3:05 a.m., corrections officers conducting their routine rounds discovered the scene. Aaron was hanging from the sheet, his body motionless, his skin already pale from the lack of oxygen. Despite immediate efforts to revive him, it was clear that he had been dead for some time. The guards who entered the cell were confronted not just by the lifeless body of a former NFL star, but by an environment charged with symbolism. Blood markings on the walls, scripture references, and a Bible positioned like an altar. The calculated nature of the setting left little doubt that this was a planned suicide rather than a spontaneous act of despair. 3 handwritten notes were recovered, each sealed in an envelope and addressed to someone significant in his life. One was for Shayana Jenkins, the fiancée who had stood by him through the trials and prison years. Another was for their daughter, Avielle, still too young to read the words her father left behind. The third was for his legal team, who had recently celebrated his acquittal in the Boston double murder case. The letters contained expressions of love, apologies, and cryptic reflections on destiny. In one, he wrote of entering a timeless realm, a phrase that suggested he viewed death not as an end but as a passage to something beyond. To Shayana, he offered reassurances of eternal connection, telling her that she would always find him in the afterlife. For Avielle, he left words of pride and encouragement, a father's attempt to provide guidance from beyond the grave. The discovery of these messages ignited immediate speculation. Some believed Hernandez's decision was influenced by an obscure Massachusetts legal principle known as abatement ab initio. Under this rule, a conviction could be vacated if the defendant died before the appeals process was completed, effectively erasing the guilty verdict from the record. If successful, the move might have opened the door for his family to pursue financial claims against the NFL and the New England Patriots, potentially restoring millions in lost salary and contract guarantees. Supporters of this theory pointed to the timing of his death, just days after his acquittal in the Boston case, as evidence of a calculated strategy. To others, the idea that he would take his own life for monetary gain seemed far too cold and clinical for a man who had spoken lovingly of his daughter and fiancée in his final notes. In the days that followed, the prison became the center of a media frenzy. Reporters camped outside the facility, cameras trained on the gates as investigators carried evidence in sealed containers. Legal analysts debated whether the abatement rule would indeed nullify his conviction. Fans who had once cheered for his touchdowns now grappled with the jarring image of a young athlete ending his life in a lonely cell. For some, the suicide was a tragic confirmation of guilt, a final escape from the consequences of murder. For others, it raised unsettling questions about the mental health of professional athletes and the unseen damage inflicted by years of high-impact collisions. As the investigation continued, new layers of complexity emerged. The autopsy revealed no signs of foul play, ruling the death a suicide. Toxicology tests showed no drugs or alcohol in his system, further reinforcing the conclusion that his actions were deliberate and soberly planned. Yet the examination of his brain yielded a revelation that would shift the narrative once again. Specialists at Boston University's CTE Center found that Hernandez suffered from stage 3 chronic traumatic encephalopathy, an advanced level of the degenerative brain disease rarely seen in someone his age. The condition, linked to repeated head trauma, is known to cause impulsivity, aggression, depression, and impaired judgment. His brain displayed damage so severe that researchers described it as one of the most extreme cases they had ever studied in a young athlete. This discovery opened a new front in the public debate. Was Hernandez fully responsible for his violent actions, or had years of concussive hits rewired his brain to the point of no return? Could the murders, the erratic behavior, and the carefully staged suicide all be symptoms of a disease that robbed him of self-control? Families of other NFL players who had suffered from CTE pointed to his case as evidence of the league's failure to protect athletes from long-term neurological harm. Legal experts speculated that if the condition had been diagnosed earlier, it might have influenced both the trials and the sentencing. Meanwhile, the legal implications of his death continued to unfold. In a startling turn, a Massachusetts judge initially vacated Hernandez's murder conviction, citing the abatement doctrine. For a brief period, it appeared that Odin Lloyd's family would have to live with the erasure of the guilty verdict, a technicality that felt like a second injustice. The ruling also opened the door for Shayana Jenkins to pursue financial claims related to his NFL contracts. But in 2019, the state's highest court reinstated the conviction, closing the loophole and affirming Hernandez's legal responsibility for Lloyd's death. The back and forth only deepened the sense of ambiguity surrounding his final act, leaving both his supporters and detractors searching for definitive answers that would never come. Within the sterile walls of the prison where Hernandez spent his final moments, the cell was eventually cleared and reassigned, its haunting history reduced to a set of evidence photos and official reports. Yet for those who followed the case, from fans who once cheered his on-field brilliance to families who endured his violence, the meaning of that night remained elusive. Was it the calculated move of a man seeking to rewrite his legacy, the desperate escape of a soul consumed by guilt, or the inevitable endpoint of a brain ravaged by trauma? The meticulously staged scene provided clues but no certainty, leaving a mystery as enduring as the contradictions that defined Aaron Hernandez's life. In the weeks following Aaron Hernandez's death, the shock that rippled through Massachusetts prisons and across the country gave way to a deeper reckoning. For sports fans, legal scholars, and grieving families, the story did not end with the removal of his body from cell 57. Instead, it expanded outward, touching issues of law, mental health, celebrity culture, and the brutal realities of professional football. Each revelation after his death forced a re-examination of how a gifted athlete could descend from superstardom to murder conviction and finally to a carefully planned suicide, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. The first public reactions were a mix of sorrow, anger, and confusion. Outside Gillette Stadium, where Hernandez had once thrilled crowds with game-winning catches, fans left jerseys, flowers, and handwritten notes. Some mourned the player they remembered, recalling moments when he seemed invincible on the field. Others expressed outrage that his crimes had overshadowed his talent and tainted their memories of championship seasons. For the family of Odin Lloyd, the news of Hernandez's death brought no closure. Lloyd's mother spoke publicly of the pain of losing her son to violence and the frustration of a legal process that had temporarily threatened to erase the guilty verdict. Her statements served as a reminder that beneath the layers of legal complexity and celebrity intrigue lay the raw human cost of Hernandez's actions. Legal battles continued even as the public tried to make sense of the tragedy. Hernandez's attorneys pursued claims against the NFL and the New England Patriots, arguing that the abatement of his conviction entitled his estate to recover portions of his lucrative contract. The Patriots had cut him immediately after his arrest, voiding future payments, but the initial vacating of his conviction gave his lawyers a brief window to challenge those decisions. The effort reignited debate over the intersection of sports and morality. Should a team be financially obligated to a player whose criminal behavior ended his career? Ultimately, the reinstatement of his conviction by the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court closed those avenues, but the legal wrangling kept his name in headlines long after his death. Meanwhile, the scientific findings from the examination of Hernandez's brain began to influence conversations about the dangers of football. The CTE diagnosis was devastating in its severity. Researchers described large sections of his brain as having deteriorated to a level comparable to much older individuals who had suffered decades of head trauma. The frontal lobes, responsible for impulse control, decision-making, and emotional regulation, showed significant damage. For neuroscientists, the case became a cautionary tale of how repeated concussions and subconcussive blows can alter personality and behavior. Sports leagues faced renewed scrutiny over their handling of player safety, with calls for stricter concussion protocols and increased support for mental health. Families of other former athletes who had died by suicide or engaged in violent acts cited Hernandez as further proof that CTE could drive destructive behavior. For those who knew Hernandez personally, the revelations about his brain offered both explanation and heartbreak. Former teammates described a young man who could light up a locker room with charisma, but who also displayed sudden flashes of aggression. Friends from his hometown recalled a teenager who seemed haunted after his father's death, prone to mood swings and risky decisions. Shayana Jenkins, the fiancée who had stood by him through trials and prison visits, gave interviews in which she expressed disbelief at his final act. She spoke of phone calls filled with optimism and plans for the future, conversations that gave no hint of impending tragedy. Her grief was compounded by the responsibility of raising their daughter, who would grow up with only fragmented memories of a father defined as much by crime as by athletic greatness. The public fascination with Hernandez's life and death inspired a wave of documentaries, books, and investigative reports. Journalists and filmmakers sifted through court documents, personal letters, and interviews, seeking to construct a narrative that could reconcile the contradictions of his character. Some emphasized the role of CTE, portraying him as a victim of a violent sport that celebrated physical dominance while neglecting the long-term health of its players. Others focused on the choices he made, pointing to the gang affiliations, volatile relationships, and patterns of intimidation that predated any formal diagnosis. The competing interpretations underscored the difficulty of assigning a single cause to a life marked by both privilege and pain. Inside Souza Baranowski, the aftermath of his suicide led to policy reviews and procedural changes. Questions arose about how a high-profile inmate under constant observation could have carried out such a deliberate plan. Officials faced scrutiny over whether warning signs were missed, including past disciplinary issues and his legal setbacks. The prison implemented new suicide prevention measures, but critics argued that no amount of oversight could fully account for the determination of someone intent on ending his life. Hernandez's death became part of a broader conversation about mental health care within the correctional system, where resources are often stretched thin and stigma discourages inmates from seeking help. As years passed, the narrative surrounding Aaron Hernandez settled into a complex legacy. For some, he remains a cautionary figure, a gifted athlete undone by personal choices and violent impulses. For others, he is a tragic example of how structural forces such as childhood trauma, the culture of professional sports, and the hidden toll of brain injuries can converge to destroy a life. His story continues to be studied in law schools, sports medicine programs, and criminal justice courses as an emblem of how talent and opportunity are not always enough to escape the consequences of inner turmoil and external pressures. For Odin Lloyd's family, no scientific finding or legal argument could undo the reality of their loss. His mother, Ursula Ward, often spoke of her son's generosity and the bright future stolen from him. She attended hearings long after the media attention faded, determined to keep her son's name alive and to remind the world that the case was not merely about a fallen celebrity, but about a young man who deserved justice. Her strength became a counterpoint to the chaos that had defined much of the Hernandez saga, offering a measure of dignity amid tragedy. In the end, Aaron Hernandez's final message remains both intimate and inscrutable. The Bible verse John 3 verse 16, written in red on his forehead and cell wall, speaks of everlasting life for those who believe. To some, it was a declaration of faith, a hope for redemption beyond earthly judgment. To others, it was an act of defiance, a way to reclaim control in a life marked by public trials and private demons. The carefully staged cell, the sealed letters, and the legal reverberations ensure that his death will never be reduced to a simple narrative of guilt or innocence. Instead, it stands as a haunting epilogue to a story that began with boundless promise and ended in a tragedy that continues to challenge the boundaries of law, science, and human understanding. The cell in which Aaron Hernandez ended his life has long since been cleared, the evidence catalogued and stored. But the questions linger, echoing in courtrooms, laboratories, and stadiums across the nation. Was his final act a calculated legal maneuver, the desperate escape of a tormented mind, or the inevitable conclusion of a brain damaged by years of brutal collisions? No verdict can fully answer those questions, and perhaps that is the lasting power of his story. It forces a reckoning with the fragility of human ambition and the hidden costs of a sport that celebrates violence even as it demands grace. In that unresolved tension lies the enduring mystery of Aaron Hernandez, a man whose death became as defining as the life that preceded it.
A quiet Toronto evening erupted into terror when a young man turned a rented van into a weapon and live-streamed every horrifying second. As sirens wailed and pedestrians fled, the world watched a calculated attack unfold in real time, exposing the deadly reach of online hate and instant infamy. The winter air in Toronto carried a quiet chill on the evening of February 24, 2020, as commuters hurried along sidewalks and cyclists navigated the crowded streets. It was an ordinary Monday, the kind of evening when the city's routines seemed predictable and safe. At the busy intersection of Yonge Street and Finch Avenue, people chatted near storefronts, a busker played soft music near the subway entrance, and the glow of neon lights reflected on wet pavement from a light drizzle earlier in the day. Beneath this calm, a 20-year-old man sat alone inside a rented U-Haul van parked a few blocks away, his face lit by the pale glow of a phone screen as he adjusted the settings for a live stream. His hands moved with deliberate precision, not the trembling of someone unsure of his next move, but the calculated motions of someone who had rehearsed this moment in his mind countless times. For weeks, he had lingered in the corners of the internet where hatred thrived. Forums filled with bitter resentment toward women, endless discussions of rejection and imagined injustice, and dark encouragement from strangers who celebrated violence had shaped his thoughts. The incel subculture, short for involuntary celibate, offered him a narrative for his own loneliness, turning personal failures into a weaponized ideology. He read posts glorifying previous attackers, men who had turned their grievances into bloodshed. Among these digital ghosts, he found twisted heroes and a blueprint for notoriety. The world outside his screen seemed indifferent to his existence, but inside these online spaces he was acknowledged, even cheered. That toxic validation hardened his resolve. He would not remain invisible. The plan was simple but devastating. A van offered speed and mass, a way to turn everyday streets into a weapon. Renting it was easy, just a credit card and an ID, no questions asked beyond the standard paperwork. Over the previous days he had scouted locations, searching for a stretch of sidewalk where people gathered but escape would be difficult. Yonge Street, already marked by the memory of a 2018 van attack, seemed almost symbolic, a stage that carried echoes of past terror. He imagined the headlines, the shocked voices of anchors describing another tragedy in the same city, and the inevitable analysis of his motives. He knew the live stream would make it impossible for the world to look away. Every second would be recorded, every scream transmitted to whoever tuned in. Inside the van, the young man adjusted the camera on his dashboard so that it captured both his face and the road ahead. The lens framed a chilling portrait, a calm driver preparing for chaos. He tested the audio, speaking softly about the night, his voice steady and almost casual. There was no anger in his tone, only a detached clarity that made his intentions even more unsettling. He explained that people needed to witness what was about to happen, that his grievances demanded recognition. Each word was delivered with the matter-of-fact rhythm of someone describing a routine task, not the violence he was about to unleash. Outside, the city continued its evening rhythm, unaware of the threat moving toward it. Couples strolled along shop-lined sidewalks, delivery workers pedaled through traffic, and commuters waited at crosswalks for the light to change. Some glanced at their phones, checking messages or scrolling through social media, perhaps unaware that a live video was already broadcasting the prelude to disaster. The attacker eased the van into traffic, merging with the steady flow of cars heading toward the intersection. He kept his speed moderate, careful not to draw attention. The camera caught the glow of streetlights sliding across his face, highlighting an expression that was neither excited nor fearful, only deliberate. As he approached Young and Finch, the sidewalks grew busier. He could see clusters of pedestrians ahead, silhouettes moving in and out of the light cast by storefronts and transit stops. His breathing remained even. He glanced briefly at the camera, almost acknowledging the unseen audience, before tightening his grip on the steering wheel. The live stream continued to capture his commentary, a calm narration that contrasted sharply with the violence about to unfold. He muttered a few final words, statements of purpose that would later be dissected by investigators searching for meaning in his hatred. Then, without hesitation, he pressed the accelerator. The van lurched forward with sudden force, leaping from the road onto the sidewalk. Tires screeched against the curb, and the quiet evening shattered in an instant. Pedestrians turned their heads at the sound of metal grinding on concrete, their faces shifting from confusion to horror as the vehicle barreled toward them. Screams erupted as people scrambled to escape, some diving into doorways, others frozen by the shock of the moment. The van swerved deliberately, not merely forward but side to side, targeting anyone in its path. The live stream showed it all in stark detail. People thrown to the ground, bicycles crushed beneath the tires, the blur of bodies as the camera jolted with each impact. Some witnesses at first thought it was an accident, a driver who had lost control. But the van's erratic movements told another story. It accelerated towards small groups, then veered sharply to catch those trying to flee. The attacker's voice remained audible over the chaos, steady and almost analytical as he continued to broadcast his deadly journey. Glass shattered as the van clipped a bus shelter, sending shards across the pavement. A cyclist barely escaped a direct hit by leaping into the street, his bike left mangled behind. Calls flooded emergency dispatch as the rampage continued. Toronto police units across the area received urgent alerts describing a U-Haul van on the sidewalk, striking multiple pedestrians. Sirens began to wail in the distance, their rising pitch cutting through the screams and the sickening thud of metal against flesh. Inside the van, the driver made no attempt to flee the scene in panic. Instead, he maneuvered with eerie control, slowing when necessary to avoid obstacles, then accelerating again when a new cluster of potential victims appeared. His focus was unbroken, his commentary uninterrupted. In the midst of terror, ordinary citizens acted with remarkable courage. A transit worker guided a group of pedestrians into a locked station entrance. A taxi driver used his car as a barrier, blocking part of the sidewalk and forcing the van to swerve into the street, where its speed temporarily dropped. These moments of defiance allowed others to escape, even as the attack continued. But the danger was far from over. The van remained in motion, and the young man behind the wheel seemed determined to extend the nightmare for as long as possible. As police vehicles closed in from multiple directions, the attacker turned onto a side street, the camera capturing flashing lights in his mirrors. Officers coordinated to trap the van without risking further civilian casualties. The live stream briefly caught the reflection of squad cars gaining ground before the attacker accelerated again, attempting to prolong his broadcast and his rampage. The chase was underway, but the true extent of the devastation already left behind would not be fully understood until the sirens faded and the sidewalks fell silent. The wail of sirens echoed through the dense urban canyon as the van sped away from the intersection, weaving between startled drivers who struggled to steer clear of its unpredictable path. Traffic lights turned red and green above, but the attacker ignored them, threading the heavy vehicle through gaps that seemed impossibly narrow. His live stream continued to broadcast every second, the camera steady on the dashboard while the city blurred past in streaks of neon and headlights. Inside, his breathing remained even, an unnerving calm that contrasted with the chaos he had left behind. Viewers who stumbled upon the feed watched in disbelief as he narrated his movements, offering cryptic remarks about purpose and recognition while police units closed the distance. Toronto police coordinated through radio chatter, dispatching cruisers from multiple precincts to create a containment perimeter. Officers were already on foot assisting the injured at Yonge and Finch, but the pursuit demanded rapid, precise action to prevent further harm. Helicopters were unavailable in the immediate minutes, leaving ground units to track the van through congested streets. Squad cars moved in from parallel roads, their lights cutting through the night, sirens rising and falling like an urgent chorus. Each intersection became a calculated gamble. Allow the van to pass to avoid a high-speed collision, or attempt a blockade and risk another burst of violence. Inside the van, the attacker's focus sharpened. He knew the chase would end eventually, but each passing minute extended his broadcast and deepened his claim to infamy. He adjusted the camera angle slightly, ensuring his face remained visible even as he executed sharp turns. He spoke in short, deliberate sentences, referencing grievances and obscure online figures who had inspired him. His words carried no tremor of fear, only the conviction of someone who believed his actions were a message rather than a crime. Viewers flooded the streaming platform with frantic comments, some pleading with him to stop, others denouncing him, and a disturbing few egging him on. Moderators struggled to shut down the feed as its audience ballooned. On the streets, pedestrians and drivers encountered the chase without warning. Cars swerved onto sidewalks to avoid collisions, horns blared in frantic succession, and people sprinted for cover behind lampposts and parked vehicles. The attacker exploited every opening, accelerating through narrow lanes, then slowing suddenly to avoid losing control. His deliberate pacing prevented police from executing a high-risk maneuver that could send the heavy van careening into bystanders. The city's dense grid became both a weapon and a shield, offering escape routes but also forcing him to navigate carefully to maintain speed. Meanwhile, at the original crime scene, first responders worked in grim urgency. Paramedics knelt beside victims sprawled on cold pavement, their gloves slick with blood as they applied pressure to wounds and checked pulses. The smell of gasoline mixed with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid bite of shattered glass. Witnesses huddled together, their faces pale and eyes wide, trying to process what they had just seen. Some described the van's path with trembling voices, replaying the moment it jumped the curb and the screams that followed. For many, the horror was compounded by the realization that the attack had been broadcast live, a calculated spectacle meant to turn their suffering into a public performance. Back in the chase, police units tightened the net. Dispatchers relayed updated coordinates every few seconds, tracking the van through surveillance cameras and eyewitness calls. Officers deployed spike strips at key intersections, coordinating timing to avoid civilian injuries. The attacker spotted the first strip in time and swerved violently, clipping a parked car and sending shards of metal across the street. The impact barely slowed him, but the maneuver gave pursuing officers critical seconds to close the gap. A second strip waited 2 blocks ahead, hidden behind a delivery truck, ready to shred the van's tires if he stayed his course. The driver maintained his eerie composure, offering a brief commentary to his unseen audience as he approached the trap. Instead of braking, he veered sharply onto a side alley, narrowly missing a pedestrian who leapt behind a dumpster. The live stream captured the jolt as the van scraped a brick wall, sparks flashing against the night sky. The attacker muttered something about destiny, his words distorted by the rattle of the vehicle as it absorbed the impact. Behind him, police vehicles struggled to navigate the narrow alley, forcing them to split and reposition along the van's likely exit routes. The chase spilled back onto a major road, where traffic had been partially cleared by officers waving frantic drivers aside. Flashing lights reflected off wet asphalt as the van accelerated once more, its tires beginning to show signs of wear from the brutal maneuvers. The engine groaned under the strain, but the attacker pressed forward, glancing occasionally at the camera to ensure his face remained framed. He seemed almost energized by the pursuit, as if every second of continued movement validated the violent narrative he had embraced. Inside the command center, senior officers weighed their options. The suspect had already injured numerous civilians, and prolonging the chase risked further casualties. Negotiators suggested attempting a phone call to the attacker, but his identity remained unconfirmed and the live stream provided no clear contact information. Tactical units prepared for a forced stop, calculating the risks of a precision maneuver that could disable the van without triggering a deadly crash. The decision was made to funnel the suspect toward an industrial zone with fewer pedestrians, a strategy requiring delicate coordination across multiple districts. As the van entered the targeted area, the streets grew darker and emptier. Warehouses loomed on either side, their loading bays silent at this late hour. Police vehicles fanned out, their sirens echoing through the empty space. The attacker slowed slightly, perhaps sensing the trap but unwilling to abandon his broadcast. He spoke again, this time addressing the viewers directly, making cryptic statements about recognition and revenge. His eyes flicked between the road and the glowing phone screen, a man balancing his final performance with the mechanics of escape. The second spike strip lay ahead, stretched across a dimly lit intersection where the asphalt opened into a wide service road. With no traffic to obstruct the view, the attacker spotted it too late. The van's front tires struck the strip with a sharp crack, the heavy vehicle shuddering as rubber shredded and metal rims scraped the pavement. Sparks flew as he attempted to maintain control, the steering wheel jerking violently in his grip. The livestream captured the sudden chaos inside the cab, the calm narration replaced by the harsh grind of metal and the rising wail of approaching sirens. Even disabled, the van rolled forward several more meters before the driver slammed the brakes. Police cruisers swarmed from every direction, boxing the vehicle in with screeching tires and flashing lights. Officers leapt from their cars, weapons drawn, their commands sharp and urgent. For a brief moment, the attacker sat motionless, illuminated by the harsh white beams of spotlights. His face, once steady, now carried the faintest trace of tension as he glanced at the camera one final time. Then he opened the door slowly, hands raised, stepping onto the cold pavement as officers advanced. The livestream continued until the phone was seized, broadcasting the final image of armed officers surrounding the young man who had turned Toronto's ordinary streets into a stage for violence. As he was handcuffed and led away, his calm demeanor returned, an unsettling mask that revealed nothing of the turmoil that had driven him to this night. The city exhaled in collective relief, but the true reckoning, the unraveling of motive, ideology, and the digital shadows that had nurtured them, was only beginning. In the hours after the van was boxed in and the attacker taken into custody, Toronto's streets shifted from chaos to a grim stillness. Police sealed off the industrial intersection where the pursuit had ended, erecting yellow tape under flickering streetlights. Officers moved with quiet urgency, documenting every detail of the capture while paramedics checked the suspect for injuries. He remained eerily composed, answering basic medical questions in a flat voice before being secured in the back of a patrol car. The camera that had carried his actions to a global audience was bagged as evidence, its battery still warm from the continuous livestream. Meanwhile, the heart of the tragedy lay several miles away at Yonge and Finch, where first responders fought to stabilize the wounded. The sidewalks were marked with the debris of panic, abandoned shoes, shattered glass, and pools of blood illuminated by the glow of street lamps and emergency lights. Ambulances ferried victims to nearby hospitals as officers collected witness statements and scoured the area for security footage. For many survivors, the realization that their suffering had been broadcast live added a cruel layer of trauma. Some had unknowingly become unwilling participants in a spectacle designed to capture attention beyond the physical scene. News of the attack spread rapidly across Canada and beyond, fueled by the very platforms the attacker had exploited. Social media feeds filled with frantic updates, grainy screenshots of the livestream, and conflicting accounts of casualties. Authorities moved swiftly to request takedowns of the video, but fragments circulated faster than they could be removed. Online forums lit up with commentary, some condemning the violence while others disturbingly framed it as a perverse form of protest. Investigators monitored these spaces closely, aware that the same communities that had inspired the attacker might attempt to glorify his actions. At police headquarters, detectives began the painstaking process of piecing together the suspect's life. Digital forensics teams combed through his devices, uncovering a trail of encrypted chats, bookmarked forums, and manifestos that echoed a familiar pattern of radicalization. He had spent months engaging with online groups that celebrated misogyny and violence, absorbing rhetoric that framed personal frustration as justification for mass harm. Messages revealed admiration for previous attackers and a desire to surpass their notoriety. He had discussed the logistics of vehicle attacks, the psychological impact of live broadcasts, and the media attention such acts would generate. Every discovery reinforced the conclusion that this was not a spontaneous outburst but the calculated execution of an ideology nurtured in the darkest corners of the internet. Interrogations began within hours of his arrest. Detectives approached carefully, aware that the suspect's composure masked a dangerous mindset. During questioning, he spoke in measured tones, offering fragmented explanations about rejection, invisibility, and the need to send a message. He referenced obscure online figures as if they were household names, describing them with reverence normally reserved for cultural icons. When asked about his victims, he showed no visible remorse, instead pivoting to abstract grievances about society. His detachment chilled the investigators, who recognized the same hallmarks seen in other ideologically driven attacks. Prosecutors prepared a complex case, charging him with multiple counts of attempted murder and terrorism-related offenses. The decision to classify the attack as an act of terrorism underscored its ideological foundation and the broader threat posed by digitally fueled extremism. Legal teams gathered evidence not only from the crime scenes but from his online activities, compiling a narrative that demonstrated premeditation and ideological motivation. The live stream itself became a central piece of evidence, a chilling real-time confession that left little doubt about intent. As the legal machinery moved forward, the human toll continued to unfold in hospitals and homes. Victims faced long recoveries from broken bones, head injuries, and emotional trauma. Families kept vigil by hospital beds, grappling with the randomness of a night when a simple walk became a fight for survival. Counselors provided support to witnesses who struggled with flashbacks of screaming crowds and the haunting knowledge that the world had watched their terror live. City officials organized vigils, where candles flickered in the cold and speakers called for unity against hate. Strangers embraced, their shared grief transcending language and background. Media coverage dissected every aspect of the attack, from the timeline of the chase to the cultural forces that had shaped the attacker's worldview. Experts on online radicalization warned that the incident was part of a growing trend in which digital echo chambers transformed alienation into violence. They highlighted the role of live streaming as a tool for instant notoriety, a way for perpetrators to bypass traditional media and reach an audience in real time. Law enforcement agencies across the country faced renewed pressure to monitor extremist forums without infringing on free expression, a delicate balance with high stakes. In court, the suspect's appearance drew intense scrutiny. Dressed in standard prison attire, he sat with the same unnerving calm that had defined the night of the attack. Prosecutors presented hours of digital evidence, including chat logs, online postings, and the unedited live stream. Viewers in the courtroom recoiled as the video replayed the moments of impact, the screams and sirens now frozen in a sterile legal setting. Survivors who testified spoke of sudden terror, the sound of tires on concrete, and the surreal knowledge that strangers around the world were watching their ordeal unfold. Their words cut through legal arguments, grounding the case in the lived pain of those who had been there. The defense offered no elaborate justification, focusing instead on mental health assessments and the possibility of diminished capacity. But the sheer volume of evidence, meticulous planning, ideological writings, and the deliberate decision to broadcast, left little room for ambiguity. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all major counts. The judge's sentencing emphasized not only the severity of the physical harm but the calculated attempt to inspire others. Life imprisonment ensured that the attacker would never again walk the streets he had once turned into a weapon. Beyond the courtroom, Toronto faced the slower work of healing. Memorials remained at Yonge and Finch, where flowers and photographs marked the places where lives had been forever changed. Survivors supported one another through therapy groups, finding strength in shared experiences of fear and resilience. City leaders invested in pedestrian safety measures and outreach programs aimed at countering online radicalization. Schools incorporated discussions about digital literacy and the dangers of extremist recruitment, hoping to disrupt the pathways that had led a lonely young man to believe that violence would give him meaning. The attack left scars that could not be measured only in injuries or legal outcomes. It forced a reckoning with the intersection of technology and hate, where platforms designed to connect people could also broadcast destruction. For many in Toronto, the memory of that February night remained vivid. The sudden roar of an engine, the screams of strangers, the flashing lights of rescue, and the unsettling knowledge that the entire world had been invited to watch. In the quiet that followed, the city carried forward with a collective determination that such a performance of violence would not define its future. even as it served as a stark warning of the dangers lurking behind screens.